Hey singers, I'm Sarah Lieb. Welcome back to Singing TV. And together you and I, and a little bit of this guy, we're making singing simple. I have a really special guest today, and I'm really excited about the fact that he agreed to come.
Of course.
Eric Robinson is a wonderful multi-instrumentalist, producer, engineer. He's worked with some really wonderful artists, famous, not famous, to be well known, and all of that kind of stuff. Many of whom you've heard of: Natasha Bedingfield, my old friend Reed Carney, Aqualung, Gabe Dixon, Leona Lewis, Carrie Brothers, lots of people. So I'm gonna just kind of ask you to introduce yourself, tell everybody a little bit about what you do.
My name is Eric Robinson. I'm a songwriter, producer, engineer, mixer, musician. I do a little bit of everything. And what else?
Well,
I met you at a coffee shop, and you said you have to come do my show, and I said, okay, now here we are.
Well, the funny part was that the person I was with ran up to Eric. They were like, "Hey!" They saw each other. They got very excited, and the person he was with and I just kind of went like, "Huh?" We were like, "Hello, I'm Sarah." She goes, "I'm Sarah," and I was like, "Sarah Bareilles?" She was like, "Yeah." "Sarah Lieb?" And I was like, "Yeah." No, kidding. And there it was. So,
something like that, yeah.
So we're really lucky to have him. Thanks for being
Sure,
here.
No,
Because this is an educational show, what I want to talk about, and we've got some people in the audience who are going to open it up for Q&A in a little while, but I want to take a producer's perspective on singing, on the modern music industry, on how you got where you are in terms of your work as both an instrumentalist and a mix engineer and producer, and sort of your take on singing in the contemporary music world and contemporary music scene from a producer's perspective, as well as an instrumentalist perspective.
Sounds good to me.
And stuff like that. So we had dinner before the taping, and Eric was telling me that he's basically been working in studios since you were a teenager, since you were like 15. You had a job in a studio while you were in college. So maybe just tell everybody a little bit about how you got to do what it is that you do, how you even got interested in that sort of aspect of music. Because a lot of people go, "I want to be a singer," and don't think that necessarily there are other avenues in the world of music other than being a performer.
Right. Well, believe it or not, I was a singer back in the day. I had a band, I wrote songs. I started out as a piano player when I was 5, and I started taking up guitar and bass and drums when I was in middle school, I think 6th, 7th grade. And I got really frustrated with, being in a band and having to rely on other people to, put their part into the group and being there for band practice. And I always felt like I was putting more sweat equity into the project. And so then I sort of started doing a solo project when I was in 8th grade and writing my own stuff and singing it and playing all the instruments myself. And
So, like, are you talking A-track?
I'm talking, I first had like an analog tape machine that was my dad's. And then I didn't even know what multi-track recording was.
Okay.
I didn't know it existed. So, and that's something that's been around since, the Beatles, so like late 60s. So, so I didn't know it existed, so I'd spend all these hours thinking about, if I had, how could I record drums, and then I record bass, and then, so I devised the system. I was like, I'll buy 2 cassette decks, and I'll record something on one, and then I'll listen to it coming off one cassette deck, and then play along with it and have that record to another. Then I'll take those and record. Yeah.
So you listen to it.
On earphones, and then play bass or guitar to the drums that I just recorded. So I had this like innate, insanely complicated idea of, that's how people must make records. I didn't know. I didn't have a recording magazine. I didn't have a book or anything like that. And then
actually, that's kind of brilliant then.
No, not really.
I mean, hey, listen.
Considering they figured it out, how to do this, 30 years prior.
You were in 8th grade. Give you a little credit.
Okay.
I'm just saying.
So anyway, then my friend said to me, "You know what? You're spending all this time thinking about this. My dad has a recording studio in our house. Why don't you come over and talk to him?" And I said, "Your dad has a recording studio. Why didn't you say anything about this before?" So, and it turned out that he had started a company called Opcode. He's the president of that company. I can't remember. So he was the head of a company called Opcode that was sort of like they made a software package called Studio Vision that was a MIDI sequencing software. It was really cutting edge. It was sort of like the way that Pro Tools is, standard now. Studio Vision was the standard for that. It's kind of before. I think early Pro Tools, it was called Sound Tools or something like that back in the day, existed. But this is like 1995, and people weren't really making records on computers then. Right. But they were.
MIDI was like cool.
MIDI was like, yeah, MIDI was really cutting edge, and like he had this studio in his garage, and he had all these sequencers and samplers and keyboards and stuff like that, and he'd get them to talk to the computer. Well, in fact, it didn't really interest me that much, because what I really wanted to do is I wanted to use real instruments at the time. So, but he kind of opened up this world of multi-track recording to me. I didn't know it existed. So then I met someone else, and I actually got access to a studio that had a very early Pro Tools rig, and the guy sort of became my first mentor and just gave me sort of carte blanche access to the studio. It was amazing, and I learned, he didn't know how to use Pro Tools at all. He just gave me the keys and said, here, figure out how to use it, here's the manual. So I read the manual, and I basically went from, over a period of like 6 months thinking, oh, I'm going to make a record with these 2 cassette decks like bouncing back and forth, and essentially like erasing my take, and then, or well, maybe I'll have a, to having access to this, Pro Tools equipped studio in 1995, 96. So that was a breakthrough thing for me, and so then I started kind of recording my own material, and I had aspirations. I'll be a singer, and I'll be a solo artist, and I'll have my own songs. And then it kind of really changed for me when I saw my friend, she was my neighbor's band, I saw them play, and I was really, really into their music, and I approached them and I said, hey, I have access to this studio, I'd love to come, I'd like to see you guys in the studio and help you make a record.
Nice.
And they said
so you were
yes.
an entrepreneur too.
I guess so.
Yeah.
So, and they were a little older than me, so I was like a freshman in high school, and they were 6 years older than, they are 6 years older than me. So they were juniors in college. So I had these 20-year-old guy or 21-year-old guys in the studio. I'm 15. And
you were like the coolest kid on the block.
No, I wasn't really at all. Really? But but I got them into the studio, and we made this 5-song EP. And
were they happy with what you did?
I mean, I didn't know anything. I mean, really, I knew some stuff. I had grown up as a musician. I knew how to play. I knew how to arrange, and I kind of knew what I wanted to hear. So this was like the best thing ever. I get to go in with these guys whose band I love, and I get to go into the studio and make music with them, and then they're going to go and play that record for people. Yeah, it was really cool. So, but from the moment I went in the studio with them, I just realized I was like, wow, I'm way more into this than doing my own music, and I really like helping other people, sort of get their ideas out. So that's how I got started.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you can tell me that. So
yeah.
Really nice. By the way, we tape live. Everybody here who's watching Singing TV knows. If those guys want to come in, let them come in and then close the door again, because it seemed like they wanted to come in. So you can open the door for them. They can come in.
Yeah. That's fine.
Yeah. No problem. We know that is. You can't edit this out, Joel. No. So I think what I want to start talking about is the music industry today. And you and I were talking a little bit about how a lot of people go to music school. And of course I teach in music school, so I love music school, and I went to music school. But in terms of being a musician, one doesn't need to go to music school or go to a conservatory or a college in order to learn how to do what it is that we do. And in fact, you were saying that you learned in the studios, and that's how you learned what sounds you wanted to get, and how everything worked, and what microphones would make things sound like that, and miking techniques, and all of that kind of stuff. You learned by watching other people. Is that right? So would you recommend, if people want to do, if there's somebody out there and they're watching and they go, I'd really love to get into that, getting an internship?
Internship is, go and learn from someone who's done it. Like, you can't get better experience than actually doing it. And then the other thing that I didn't learn until much later is that you're going to fail at it a lot. You're going to be unhappy with your recordings. You're going to be, you're going to say to yourself, why doesn't it sound like this? And sound like that. Well, you have to fail to succeed. And that's something that I really try and remind myself of every day. It's like, okay, no one just steps in and does it right the first time, or else life wouldn't exist. You know, it's like, and that's the whole, you know, that's the whole point to it. It's like, for me, it's like, okay, you know, if I'm working on a song, it's like, it's never, you know, I mean, sometimes it's right, like right away, but it takes like steps in saying, okay, that's not what I want. Okay, that's not what I want to get there. So, you know, no better place to learn than in the studio, you know, where you have, you know, pressure, where people are expecting you to do stuff. Like, yeah, you're going to mess up. People are going to say that's wrong. You need to redo that. You're going to record something and it's going to sound terrible, and you're going to probably lose some jobs, you know, at some point. I mean, that's just like all part of it, and you have to, you know, keep telling yourself, like, okay, it takes time. It's not something, like making records isn't something you learn in like 2 years. It's something you learn in like 10 years.
Absolutely, and not so dissimilar from other avenues that we take in music. You know, we talk about practicing so much. People are like, I just want to be a singer. Well, you know, you can't get there without practicing. And my students all the time, we go, you know, I did fine in my lesson, and as soon as I got on stage, and that's what we practice. And we do things over and over and over and over, and you get to have different takes in the studio, thank goodness, right? These days at least. As opposed to, you know, getting on stage and doing it right the first time. The reason we practice is so that if you get in the habit of doing things over and over and over, then once you're on stage, hopefully, eventually, and you're on stage enough, all the other stuff isn't gonna, you know, you're not gonna get so nervous that you forget everything you've learned and just go back to your old habits, which may be bad habits, right, in terms of, you know, breathing and control or anything really. So I think that you make a really, really a good point there. And so, tell me, you know, we were talking about Gabe Dixon's coming out with a new record that you just produced, and you really like his music, and I like his music too, so that's exciting.
I actually recorded and mixed that record.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, yeah, that record was really interesting. I mean, Gabe is an incredible piano player and singer, and just has a vocabulary unlike anyone I've probably ever worked with. And like, interestingly, when we were starting the tracking session for that record, he got me to listen to the piano in a way that I've never heard before, where he sat down and he was sort of checking the action of, you know, the keys and, you know. Which
means, sorry, I just want to jump in.
Which means like making sure. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just you know, if you're pressing down the notes on the piano, sometimes they're a little harder to press, sometimes they're a little easier to press.
Yeah.
So that's the action on the piano.
So he was checking the action on the piano and listening to the sound of the hammers, and he found like 3 or 4, you know, keys that he didn't like the sound of. And we had a piano technician there, and he said, okay, he would go up the scale and down and find a note and say, hey, this note's like a little bit too hard, can you soften up the hammer a little bit? I'd never, ever heard anyone do that before. And also, he would say, yeah, Eric, do you hear that? Like, do you hear that in the room? And then I'd check in the control room through the microphones, and I'd say, yeah, I hear that. I've never thought of the piano in that sort of way, like, oh wow, we should work on sort of like the smoothness of tonality between keys, making the tones even, so if you go between notes, one doesn't poke out in a way that you don't want it to. So, yeah, and then, you know, that record was just very interesting musically. It's sort of a hybrid of piano pop and rock and jazz and sort of experimental stuff, and then there's some stuff on it that sounds very current, like sort of Vampire Weekend-ish, and some stuff that sounds like folky but modern, like Mumford & Sons. Like, it's a really cool record.
Nice.
Yeah.
When you work with people, how often would you say that people come to you and they say, hey, I've heard what you've done, I really like your work, can you produce or mix or, you know, play on my record? Yes. And how often do you go to people and say, hey, let's work together?
I'd say it's like 50-50. I mean, people really, when they come and approach you, it's usually because they've heard something you've done, and they say, I really like the sound of that record, I want to work on something with you that has sort of some similar qualities, or, you know, I really like what you do with the drums, or I like how your vocals sound, or something like that. And then, you know, other times I hear someone and I'd say, I really, really need to work with them. And, you know, it's about 50-50.
And is that ever because you think you could do a better job than the last record? Like you really, really love that artist, but maybe they should be going in this direction and you could get them there?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, but not with like a, I don't think of it as like, wow, the person who did their last record did a terrible job. Because obviously, if I got into it, they're doing something right.
Absolutely.
But usually for me, it starts with a live performance.
Mm-hmm.
I really try and work with artists who have a great live show. It's tough to sell records without, having a great live show and touring and having something you can build upon and having something that people want to come back and see over and over again. And, I really try and see people live before I even sort of consider working with them, and then especially like if we're going to go into the studio, like see like what do they bring on stage and what is their live show like, and what influences and instruments could make it interesting and different, and what differentiates them from everyone else who's sort of in their sphere around them.
Mm-hmm. Which really kind of brings us to an interesting point. Most people, all people in the music industry, know how music is made. But those of you who are behind the screen, some of you know, some of you don't. And I think there's a lot of talk today about the way that music is manipulated in the studio. So when you said that you need to hear and you love to work with artists who can play really, really wonderful live shows,
right.
Of course that warms my heart because as someone who's a singer, I want for people to be able to sing well with or without things like autotune and Melodyne. Although those are manipulations that we use today because the ear's, so used to hearing these things that in order to make an album radio friendly, we use those tools in some capacity on pretty much every album recorded. But it means a lot that's something that's really important to you. So would you talk about not how much one uses it or the other?
Sure.
That isn't so important as much as the use of manipulating people's vocals.
Sure. Well, I think there's two things we have to differentiate first of all, because there's auto-tune, like the way that T-Pain uses it, which is an artistic effect.
Right.
And then there's auto-tune and other tuning programs that are used to, to a lesser effect to make performances, more pitch accurate.
Right.
So
for the audience, let's just say, if you're hearing something that it sounds purposefully sort of metallic, like T-Pain, or Do You Believe in Life After that Cher song, which was
that
like
was
the first thing to do, exactly.
Yeah.
The first way to use autotune in a way that was as an effect.
Yeah,
as opposed the way you would use reverb or chorus or delay or something.
Yeah.
Use autotune. As opposed to the kind that you don't hear, that's just kind of tuning up little things here and there so that your ear doesn't get distracted and start listening to other stuff.
Sure. I mean, my position on it is I think that can be a great tool used in moderation. I don't really subscribe to the whole our ear is used to it now, because it's like you hear older records on the radio at all. Do people complain about it? No. Were people better singers back then? Maybe. But, that's not really for me to judge. But it's like, hey, if you listen to, K-Rock and you hear a Linkin Park song and then you hear a Sublime song or a Led Zeppelin song, it's not like the Led Zeppelin song comes on and you're like, oh my gosh, they weren't tuning the vocals. Like, come on. And Robert Plant's not the most on-pitch singer all the time. It doesn't bother you. But, there's certain things, like when I'm in the studio and I'm working on a vocal, I'd say, I just really wanted them, like this was a great take, but I really wanted them to reach that note higher, but their tone was great. Everything about it was great, but I just want them to and get up just a little bit higher. With a tuning program, I can do that. So like when I go in and tune something, I don't zero everything out and make everything boom, 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 zero like right on pitch. Like sometimes stuff is way, way off pitch, and that's great. Or sometimes I'll make it
add to the character.
Yeah, well, sometimes I'll make it even more off pitch. But it's like it's we have sort of infinite ways of manipulating our records now, our recordings. I think it can be a great tool. I mean, it's definitely a useful tool for certain things like backing vocals. It really helps if backing vocals are tight, and if you don't have A, the money, or B, a singer if you don't have the money to like hire a backing singer to sing all the backing vocals, or the singer whose record it is going to sing them, but they just aren't, you know, always right on. If I can make the backing vocals a little bit more on pitch, it tightens them up, and all of a sudden they become a much tighter part rather than something that's sort of flabby and you know, taking up a little bit too much space.
Right, you don't want it to detract from, you don't want everyone, the background vocals to
Yeah.
detract from.
I mean, sometimes
the
it's
singer.
sometimes it's a good thing for the backing vocals to be a little bit out, but sometimes, like, more often than not, I like the backing vocals to be like tighter, more like a unit, more like a choir. And if I can work on that, great. And then, you know, in terms of the lead vocal or doubles and stuff like that, if I can, you know, if I can do little things to make it a better performance and bring out more of the emotion in the words, I think, you know, that's fine. I just think moderation and knowing how to use those programs without destroying someone's voice and, you know, making it sound like a computer, you know, it's important to know how to use the program.
What do people, when they meet you, ask you the most?
People in general.
Well, I'm thinking about opening up pretty soon to our students here.
Okay.
I'm sort of thinking about, I wonder what questions they're going to ask Eric.
I don't know. I live in a cave. I don't meet that many people.
Right.
Don't you know what a
You sit
recording
in the
studio is
studio
like?
all day.
Yeah. You mean like the lady at the supermarket in the morning? Like, I don't know. No, I mean, I don't know. What do people ask
Hey,
me?
pretty face, who are you recording these days?
I don't know. Why don't we ask some questions and then we'll find out.
Let's do it. Can we open it up? I know, Jill, you've been eager to ask some questions, so please do.
Where to start? As like a younger aspiring singer-songwriter / artist,
Right.
like as one, like I'm a fan of your work, and like Matt Nathanson and Matt Wertz, Bethany Dillion and Brooke Fraser.
Oh,
I'm a
thanks.
huge listening to all of them, and I love the way the records sound.
Oh, cool.
But how do someone like me like get in contact with you and not necessarily work with right off the bat, but
Sure.
to get a connection with and
I mean, I think you can always email, so, you know, find someone on Facebook, find someone on MySpace, find their personal webpage, get in touch with their manager. Like, I got my first job in New York. I emailed my idol, and he gave me my first gig. So it's like, what's the harm in reaching out to someone? I mean, you know, I consider myself pretty an available person. Like, I answer all those, you know, platforms, you know, of communication, and I think it's always like, you know, it's always great to and appropriate to just reach out to someone and say, hey, this is who I am, this is what I'm doing, you know, I'm a fan of this, or I like what you did with that, or I hate this, or, you know, I mean, you can always just write someone and introduce yourself.
That comes up really well. I hated your work on this album.
Hey, you know,
Can you hire me?
critiques or praise are equally welcomed. But, you know, I think you can always do that, and I don't think there's anyone who doesn't want to hear from someone who appreciates their work, because it's like, hey, that's why I got into this, because there's people's work who I appreciated, and I said, oh, I want to do what they want to do, and, you know, yeah, you can always reach out to someone.
Especially behind the scenes, I think, because you work as someone who's less often, you know, center stage.
Right.
You're either backing people up or mixing them and producing them.
Right.
I think it means a lot to people who are doing things other than being the front man or the lead singer, when people appreciate and love what they do. So it's even more exciting. Oh, you like that? Yeah. I remember working on that record. We did this and we did that. I imagine that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's great, you know. So yeah, you can always, you know, MySpace is great, Facebook's great. You know, I think most people are on those, you know, social media platforms now. So it's like, yeah, you can find almost anyone. It's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Like,
when you're looking for a band, you say you like to go to live shows. Is it more important for you to see? Obviously, both things have to be there, but is it more important to see more creativity or more ability in the?
That's a really good question.
Like, what draws you? What gets you? You're like, oh man, that's just,
I mean,
I have to work with these guys.
It really depends on the artist. Like, someone could have 100% creativity and 0 ability. You can make a great record. You just get people into play on the record who have great ability. And then on the flip side, you know, someone could have all this ability, 0 creativity, and then, you know, between what I bring to the table and, you know, what other people we might have work on the record, that might, you know, pull up the slack in that department. So, I mean, it doesn't really, I mean, either way, it's just great to have, either. But if someone doesn't have any creativity or ability, then it's kind of hard.
Yeah, that
But I've definitely worked with both people. I've worked with people who are kind of subpar, not subpar, but they aren't stellar musicians, but they have great ideas. And if they have a great idea, then it's like, okay, let's figure out how to do it. Like, I play a bunch of instruments, you can kind of play, and we'll figure it out. And I know, sometimes a lot of times I bring other musicians. Like, I sort of have a crew of people that I work with a lot, who I've made a lot of records with. I'll bring some of those people in to sort of help, pick up the slack or put in those finishing details, or everything that's missing from what they can't do. So yeah, I mean, either one of those is a great quality to have.
Okay.
But I'd say creativity can't be beat, because if someone has a vision for something, that's great. It's better for someone to come in and say, I have this idea, I really want to do this, than for them to come in and not really have a clue and say, what do you think? And have me come up with the concept for the record. It's like, I don't want to do that. It's your, it's your record. It should be a collaboration, really. It should be, 50-50.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
We were talking earlier about, you're playing piano and your love of jazz and the people we know in common. How important for aspiring singers and musicians, I've made it very, very clear to most people who know me that because so much of the contemporary music that we make, be it singer-songwriter or reggae or R&B, rhythm and blues, pop, rap, hip-hop, all comes from the history that we have, the rich history in this country of blues and jazz that led to rock and roll and everything beyond it.
Sure.
So I know that you have a love for that, although
Yeah.
the records that you produce generally and play on and engineer aren't necessarily jazz records,
Yeah.
although maybe jazz influence.
There's
So
some influence there every once in a while.
yeah, how, and certainly has been influenced for you in your own music, how important do you think education, be it in school or outside of school, is in terms of taking lessons on an instrument, understanding the way music works in terms of getting around the keyboard or around the guitar, or being able to understand scales and things in terms of being a singer? How important do you think that is for people, even if they don't want to be performers, but as a producer?
Sure. I think it's a great tool to have. Like, if you have it, it just increases your vocabulary. It gives you more, musical horsepower, so to speak. It gives you more gears too. It's like, oh, you can do this thing, or you can be someone who can arrange and write, or you can be someone who can, transpose and score, or it just gives you different modes that you can work in. I think that's ultimately a great thing. Now, are there people who have absolutely zero training who are just brilliant and can come up with the most amazingly beautiful stuff? Definitely.
Mm-hmm. But they're fewer and far between.
Fewer and far between. So yeah, I think it's great to have a knowledge of history, and I took theory. I grew up on piano theory, and hit classical music and jazz music. That was my foundation. So yeah, I think it's a great foundation to have.
That's what I like to hear as a teacher.
Yeah, I think it's great.
But I hoped you would say.
No, I know, but I also, for anyone who hasn't had, it's sort of a luxury to get that in a lot of places.
You get singing TV for free.
Well, that's true, but but not everyone can can learn all that stuff. So
Absolutely.
if you don't have that, there's still a place for you. I think you have to figure out, okay, what makes you special? What makes you different? And what kind of music can you write and play? It's can be great.
Mm-hmm.
Can be timeless.
I think that's probably what adds to the allure of you as a musician, just because you can produce and you can mix, you can work as an engineer, but you can also play on things. You're a multi-instrumentalist.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that people maybe forget a little bit, is that sometimes when you think about a producer or an engineer, we forget to think of them, and I've done this myself, as more than just a pair of really, really great ears. Where I've said something like this, and I've had people in studios say to me, oh, well, why don't you just, you're singing a flat 9 there, why don't you sing a natural 9 or something? I go, whoa, You know, I
Right.
forget that there's that whole big, beautiful brain with inside in between those ears, and I think that adds a lot to what you could do. And when we were talking earlier,
Yeah.
you said to me, you know, the music industry is changing a lot, and the
Yeah.
more things that you can do, the better you can be as a musician. So, you know I'm saying that because I imagine that that's true for you, that when you can do a lot of different things.
Yeah, for me it's true. I mean,
Uh-huh.
I feel really lucky to be able to do like sort of jump around and do different things,
Mhm.
and produce a record and then mix a record and then engineer a record. It's really fun for me.
Mhm.
But there's like anything, there's a downside to it. It's like, well, since I divide my time up, I don't really specialize in one thing. Although I'd say I'd specialize. Like, I feel like I specialize in all those things. But to be fair, it's like, well, there's some people who all they do is engineer records every day. There's some people who just mix records every day.
Mhm.
But it's getting harder to, there are fewer jobs where you can just do one thing.
Absolutely.
But there's also people like there's session musicians that I know where it's like all they do is play drums every day. You know what? They're amazing at it because they do it
Mhm.
every day. And if one day they decided, well, I'm going to play drums and I'm going to play bass, their skills would kind of go away, or they wouldn't, stay quite as sharp. So,
Right. There's something to be said for being really good at one thing.
yeah, I think it's more about finding your niche and like
Mhm.
finding out, okay, well, what's my niche in this? And like my niche just happens to be like I work in the studio in different capacities.
Mhm.
So if someone needs a record mixed, then I do that. If someone needs me to produce, record, mix, co-write, play on a record, then I do that. It's like, the variety of that is like what keeps it interesting to me. So, yeah.